Testing 1, 2. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Plática today. Some, ground rules or setting the tone of what our conversation is about today. Nonpartisan, politically neutral. This is not a discussion of one party or another. The purpose of this conversation and why I curated it was just on the heels of the recent election. There was a lot of conversation of lumping Hispanics all into just this one monolith, right? And when they would show the demographic breakdown of the Hispanic vote, the demographics was only the nationality or countries of origin. It wasn't broken down by race, whether they were Black Latinos, Asian Latinos, Indigenous Latinos. So even for myself, it made me curious because I'm like, I know we don't all vote the same, right? But I wanted to kind of unpack because we're a lot more nuanced as Latinos. We're a lot more nuanced than that. Every Latin American country also has different political climates, and it depends on what era you were born in, in your country of origin, there's a different political climate. So my goal also for a couple of our panelists that are non-US born is to also unpack that. Like, does the political climate of your Latin American country of origin influence how you vote and what topics are important to you? Quick example, like immigration obviously is one of the number one issues with Latinos, right? Not for Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans are birthright citizens, right? So perfect example of how we're not a monolith, right? So this is gonna be a fun conversation, engaging conversation, a safe conversation, and we'll save Q&A for the end, but I do just ask that everyone, including our panelists and myself, we all just remain respectful of each other's opinions. Please know that I will interrupt if something gets a little heated or gets off topic. So just, forewarning, I'm a Puerto Rican. Just saying. I got my flag in there too, just so y'all know, because that's what we do. So awesome. But again, thanks everyone for carving out, some time in your day to come and support and come to listen. So I'm gonna just kick it off to talk a little bit, just read over a couple of bios, and I'll share with you the mission of my organization. So I'm Sharon Cruz, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit 501c3, the Afro-Latino Education and Arts Collective. If you've not heard of my organization, but you've heard of the Afro-Latino Culture Fest that goes on here, that's one of the signature events of my organization, and I'm the curator and producer. I'm gonna brag a little bit because what I've learned through my community nationwide is that the Afro-Latino Culture Fest that we've curated is one of the biggest authentic Afro-Latino Culture Fests on the West Coast. So that's very, very, very exciting for me. And then a little bit about my organization. The Afro-Latino Education Arts Collective is a nonprofit organization dedicated to celebrating, preserving, and amplifying the diverse cultures and contributions of Afro-Latinos throughout Latin America. Through cultural programming, workshops, and events, we address critical issues like colorism and visibility in the erasure of Afro-Latino history while fostering pride in this rich heritage. With Los Angeles County home to a vibrant Afro-Latino population of over 47,000, the collective serves as a hub for advocacy, education, and community empowerment. Our flagship event, the Afro-Latino Culture Fest, unites communities to celebrate Afro-Latino identities, traditions, live music, dance, food, educational panels, becoming a hallmark of the cultural celebration in the city. We're supported by a dedicated group of Afro-Latino and other community volunteers whom we proudly consider founding members. Together we work to transform narratives, inspire cross-cultural connections, and ensure Afro-Latino stories are woven into the broader histories of Latin America. The collective is committed to advancing representation, equity, and pride for Afro-Latinos in Los Angeles and beyond. Again, welcome. So now I'm going to talk about, yes, thank you. a bio of our panelists here to kick it off. First up, make sure I'm saying your last name right, Kevin Kandambi. Okay, Kevin Kandambi is Mexilankan. What is that? Mexican and Sri Lankan. First generation child of immigrants who was born and raised in Southern California. He is currently a PhD candidate in Chicano and Central American Studies with a concentration in Asian American Studies at UCLA. Ooh. Kevin's, yes, hello! I'm just saying, we got brilliant minds up here. Kevin's primary research interest explores Asian Latine mixed identity in the United States to understand how identity formation processes inform what it means to be Latine, Asian American, and mixed race in the United States as non-white children of the diaspora. Welcome, Kevin Kandambi. Woo! All right. Up next, my sister from another mister. Aura Vasquez, Afro-Colombiana advocate, organizer, and podcast host. She is an advocate for renewable energy, advisor, and a host of the Impact Hour podcast, where she highlights stories of environmental and social change dedicated to fostering a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable world. Aura's work amplifies the voices of historically marginalized communities. Aura's achievements in environmental leadership include spearheading Los Angeles' Solar for Renters program, leading the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign to secure the city's coal-free commitment by 2025, and playing a key role in banning single-use plastic bags. She also led efforts to decarbonize Los Angeles and electrify new buildings in 2022. 2017, Aura made history. Oh, it goes on, honey. We got another brilliant mind up here. Aura made history as the youngest and first immigrant appointed to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power Board of Commissioners. She oversaw the nation's largest owned utility, serving millions, and was instrumental in enacting a local Green New Deal, committing LADWP to 100% renewable energy. Over a decade of experience working in diverse stakeholders in the public and private sectors, Aura is the founder of and CEO of Vasquez Solution and serves as a policy advisor in Congressman Elliot Engel's office. She also ran for city council and represented her community on her neighborhood council. I'm just saying, she's passionate about multiculturalism. And wait, what did you historically do again? You were the first.
I was the first Afro-Latina to run.
You got a mic. You got a mic. God.
I was the first Afro-Latina to run for city council in Los Angeles.
Bam! I'm just saying, change makers up here. All right, welcome, Aura Vasquez. Moving right along to last but not least, Eastside Pasos, a proud Zapotec from Villa Hidalgo, Yalalag. Did I say that right? Yalalag? Okay, Yalalag, Oaxaca, has spent over 2 decades dedicated to preserving indigenous culture and empowering immigrant communities. Trilingual, in Zapotec, Spanish, and English, Isai bridges cultures and languages to connect with immigrant youth and families. Currently, he's the executive director of Senderos in Santa Cruz, California. Isai leads initiatives in cultural, arts, education, community building. His career highlights include directing community affairs for Cielo in Los Angeles as president of Aura, regional organization of Oaxaca, and organizing Acclaim, you're going to study with this word, Huelahuetza. Hey, all right. Celebrations across California and Arizona. As a graduate of California State University, Los Angeles, Isai has mentored countless youth, championing higher education and cultural pride. He's founded businesses focused on marketing cultural traditions, taught folklorico dance, revitalized indigenous crafts, and conducted citizenship workshops. Over a decade, he performed with Ballet Folklorico Grandeza Mexicana and collaborated with renowned artists like Lila Downs, Luis Miguel, and Mariachi Sol de Mexico. Woo! Isai activism extends to supporting vulnerable communities in Los Angeles, aiding Oaxaca during crisis, and securing critical resources during COVID-19 through music, dance, and advocacy. Isai celebrates Oaxaca's rich heritage, inspiring pride, resilience, in indigenous communities. Welcome, Isai. All right, we're about to kick these questions off. We'll save Q&A for the end, unless there's just a burning, really good question that you have that comes up. I'm open for that. I'm open. This is not rigid. We're flexible here. So some of the questions I've curated or customized specifically for each of our panelists, and then we have some more generalized questions. So I'm gonna kick it off with you, Kevin. All right, so mixing identity, mixing priorities. First question for Kevin. As a researcher of Asian Latine mixed identities, what have you observed about how mixed race Latinos approach political issues? Are their priorities more reflective of shared Latino concerns or influenced by their dual identities?
I think it's definitely both. Latinos obviously are not a monolith, right? So to say that Asian Latinos are not sharing those same struggles as Latinos would be false, right? But also Asian Latinos are navigating a mixed identity that is often erased or not acknowledged, right? So this idea of mixedness doesn't just pertain, right, to the U.S. context of, the mixing of people from Asia or Latin America here in the U.S., right? But there's also a long history of Asian slavery to Mexico that started as early as the 1500s. And so that's a history that's often not acknowledged, right? And so even to just be in these conversations, right, with other Afro-Latino panelists or indigenous folks from Latin America, right, it's an important understanding that Latinos are, first off, obviously not a monolith, but also that Asian Latinos, although they have a different experience, still do share those same issues, right, around immigration, around issues around the economy, right? And so it's important that we don't continue conflating the Latino community to just focus one narrative, but start looking at all the perspectives, right? And to not take away or detract from one experience as being the sole understanding of Latinos.
All right. I mean, I'm just saying, so you already got some things sparking in my brain. So off the cuff for me, what is an Asian Latino?
Yeah, so obviously there's different ways that people can identify, right? So myself, I identify as Asian Latino, but I have an experience that's more US based, right? So I have immigrant parents from Mexico and Sri Lanka. They met here in California. And so I have those cultures, right? But I grew up in the US with that culture as well. Whereas there's large, huge demographics of Asian migration to Latin America, right? So we can think of the diasporas in Mexico, right? That there's a lot in Baja California, 1800s, right? We can think of Sonora and other places near.
What specific Asian groups migrated?
So that those groups were mostly Chinese, but then we can think of the Japanese Brazilians, right, or Japanese Peruanos, right? And so there's different diasporas that have gone to Latin America, right? It's not that it's just one demographic of people from Asia, but that there's long histories of migration from Asia to Latin America. And it's important to acknowledge, right, that even in Latin America, there is no one way to be Latino, right, or to be Latin American descent, right? I think it gets conflated with the broader narrative of mestizaje and how that erases people, right, to just be this idea that, we're all just mixed, right? And, but also that's not acknowledging, right, the Asian descendants, the African descendants, right, and more importantly, right, also the indigenous communities that don't identify, right, with this broader Latino kind of narrative that continues to erase those communities present today.
I love that. And the last question again, because I'm excited about talking to him because honestly, I can say I've never actually sat down and talked to and spoken to an Asian identifying Latino. So I'm kind of digging in because what I'll also say in addition to the identity of Asian Latino, the footprint of the culture is also there, and it's reflective in food culture in a lot of those places, like in Peru. So that tells you when you look at food anthropology, that tells you what cultures exist, right, within that respective country. So thank you for that. I just kind of wanted to share with that. So I'll dive into just kind of a generic question before I jump over to the next question for Aura. And this is for any of the panelists that just want to dive in. And this is kind of I guess, let me see. Okay, yeah, united but diverse, right? So how can the Latino, I know Aura's going to take this one. How can the Latino electorate build solidarity across racial and cultural lines while addressing the unique issues of groups like the Afro-Latinos, the Asian Latinos, and Indigenous peoples of Latin America? Dale, Aura, I know that's your jam.
I want to approach this question first by preface that we're not a homogeneous culture either. Even among Afro-Latinos, we're also different. Like Brazilian Afro-descendants are not the same as Colombian Afro-descendants, even though we maybe came in a similar, way. So as an organizer, as a community organizer, I learned very early that people act out of their own self-interest, what matters to them. And that is obviously tainted or shaped by a lot of different things. If you were a Latino that maybe grew up a little more affluent, obviously your self-interest will be very different than mine. I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but think about like the white Cubans, very different than a lot of Afro-descendant folks from other places. Also your environment. If you maybe grow up in my islander folks, very different approach to how we operate in like a political space, So this is why it's been so hard in the recent year, an election year last year, to get lumped in with a lot of other people that maybe don't think like me or you, but that they made their choices and everybody has they have the power of choice. But all those choices are affecting us. So, a lot of today in 2025, Jesus, we're already in 2025. Today, there are Latinos that are very affluent. Some of them are like the richest people in the world. They have very different people. They're very difficult. They have very different interests that a working class Latino or an immigrant Latino that maybe is babysitting or working in the fields, and like it's very different. And also as an environmentalist, as an environmental justice advocate and an environmental justice activist, it's been really hard also for me to see something that affects all of us: clean air, clean water, access to lands, access to renewable energy for everybody. It's been really hard for me to hear that, Latinos don't care about that because, they only care about immigration because they're all immigrants. It isn't true in this country. Like we have a stellar PhD here, candidate, and I came here when I was 18 years old. I learned English as an adult. So my interest very different than, than other people. So I just want to remind people when we want to criticize, and as much as we feel strongly about what other people's choices in the political landscape has been, I want to remind ourselves that we are so diverse and different, and we can't generalize, because that's when the division comes. And that's when they're like, throws us around, And it makes it really hard. There are also very like religious people in Latin America. My family, I have never prayed with my family ever. And we're like, one of those Catholics that go to baptisms and weddings and things like that. But we're not religious people. I have girlfriends, I have friends that are very in tune with their Christianity, and they vote as such, and some of us were more liberal, So I wanted to just mention that because as much as I want to provide an answer, point the answer here, I think it's important to remember how diverse we are and how we differ and the danger of generalizing when it comes to this topic.
That sounds daunting. And I'm just, because the question is, how do we build solidarity? Is that even a possibility? Is that a realistic? You know what I mean? Is that even realistic considering how diverse we are? Are we putting pressure in the wrong space for us of trying to force this sense of solidarity when we have so much diversity amongst us? Because it's still, saying solidarity means like we're still forcing ourselves into a monolithic way of thinking and viewing. There's 22 different Latin American countries with different political climates that folks come from. So I kind of unpack it like that. That's like saying, I look at 22 different countries in Latin America, like how many states in the United States? 51 states. That's like saying all 51 states, because everybody's American, should all vote the same. Even the states are different. Texas is very different from California. I can't understand what they say in Louisiana. I'm just saying, it's like, it's very diverse. So I guess, is that a daunting question? Like, does any of the panelists think there's a way to build solidarity? I mean, a real honest, thought on that. How do we unpack that? Is there a way to build solidarity, to build solidarity amongst our groups for the Latino vote? You gotta take a break real quick. Anybody want to take it? Yeah. Anybody want to take it?
Everyone's like looking at me with that.
Whatever brave soul wants to take that.
Ustedes antes de fallarem a mí, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for being here. I just gave you a perfect example of what happens in the world, what's actually happening here. There's people that speak a certain language, but even though we do speak Spanish, doesn't mean that we all think the same. So basically what I'm saying is, it is very important sometimes that yes, every Latino might think the same way, but unfortunately there's other needs. So the reason why I wanted to say yes, I'm trilingual by the way. I speak Zapoteco from the state of Oaxaca, Mexico. I came here as a young age. Spanish became my third language, because English was my second. But it's very, very important what was mentioned. I will probably just wanted to add, is that it's very important to know that we are not all the same, and I'm focusing especially on the indigenous community. We just focused on the Afro community, Afro-Latino community, and also other communities that have actually, in a way, I would probably say emerged. Right? So all I can say is that it is very important to make sure that we understand that we're not all the same. So that's all I wanted to add for now.
It's coming. We're just warming up. Yeah. We're just warming up. A young lady in the audience has a burning question. Did you have a burning comment you want to share?
It wasn't a burning question, but I'm hearing this is music to my ears because I feel like everybody else. But I wanted to add this. The other thing about immigration, and she pointed it out, the different generations that arrived into this country. Like me, I came probably about the same time. I was also, not time, but at the same age. So we have a completely different makeup when it comes to our psychological, communal, ethical, and educational background. To say the least, I just naming 3 things out of the 100 things that make a human being.
Yes.
So there is also that, like when I was watching television, I'm from Venezuela, I should say that my name is Elizabeth Correa Jordan. And when I would watch TV, which I don't like watching the news because it was so toxic and it impacted me every time they talk about Venezuelans this, Venezuelan that, Venezuelan this, Venezuelan that.
The political climate there, right?
It was extremely toxic and it was hurtful.
Sure.
Because when you use that word,
Sure.
you are throwing a whole group of people
Sure. It creates a violent narrative against the culture of the people there.
in the fire. And they have no voice to go and say, no, look, you are totally wrong. And I wasn't even the one person who just arrived.
Yes.
So there is this thing with us sometimes. Not everybody, but for us who come, those of you who are there,
I'm gonna put a chair up here for this lady.
we're like this. No, because we're like this. We're like this, and we're like this. Sometimes we are like
Both
this.
sides of the fence. You're on
Yeah.
both sides of the fence.
Sometimes we
Yeah.
are in different
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So
Love it.
it's very difficult.
Indeed.
And that obviously has an impact on who you are and what you identify
Absolutely.
with and how you want people to see you
Great
and
point.
respect and accept. who you
Absolutely.
are.
Your first name again?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. I'm gonna put a chair up here
Bravo.
for you. I'm gonna just go sit down in your spot.
Sharon,
I'm up here. Great,
and-
great feedback. Yes, ma'am.
And the spirit of collaboration, because I think I don't want to leave you guys in the limbo of like, is there a space to collaborate? Absolutely. Do I think that in 2025 we're going to see a massive kind of moment to come together as one? I'm not sure. Because right now it's not only polarizing for Afro-Latinos, for Indigenous folks, for Latinos of Asian descent. It's polarizing for everybody right now. I feel, and as a person that is involved in politics, I feel like I'm running around like a chicken without a head, Gallina sin cabeza. And I'm just like, brace yourselves, because I don't even know what's going on. And the antidote to that feeling, for me at least, has been organized in my local community on the things that we can control. So if I support people not being, like learning about their rights and when they have immigrated to this country, in whichever status they are, that's what I'm focusing on, educating people about that. The fires just happened, guys. Like, this is a serious situation that we are in Los Angeles. And a lot of people in our community, we saw them responding so quickly, going to clean up the laborers, like all those folks. And you don't understand how toxic right now the Palisades, unfortunately, and near the fires is, because it's just what it is. We're talking about like war zone toxic, where people shouldn't even be there. So like, how did you educate people and come to collaborate in those issues that bring us together, instead of like, well, you don't like these folks and you like those folks and you don't want them to do this and you want them to do that, and just maybe finding the commonalities and working together and finding those common points so that we can, unite.
Really great points. And I'm paraphrasing this, but I think of this interview I saw with Malcolm X. Malcolm X was talking about what he refers to as the African diaspora, meaning people of predominantly African descent in the Western Hemisphere. And he said for Black people to organize, he said, because there's power in numbers in any group. He said we must first organize amongst ourselves. So the African Americans need to organize amongst African Americans. Afro-Peruanos need to organize amongst Afro-Peruanos. Afro-Venezolanos need to organize against Afro-Venezolanos, on and on and on. And then once you're organized amongst yourself, then you come together. And then that's where the power in numbers are. And I say that because I'm then pass a mic to, this is a great question for Kevin, just because this is his area of expertise, is now we going to mixed racial identity, which is, I like the word Isai uses, an emerging, a group, like emerging culture, that's also working for identity and to have a voice. And I guess for you, Kevin, like just in this whole talk of the, black and white dynamic, when we have mixed race folks, like I don't consider myself mixed race per se, because my father is an Afro-Indigenous Puerto Rican, my mom's African American, but I can understand being multi-ethnic, being torn between the two dynamics. How does that express itself, within a mixed race community in terms of, what the group focuses on, in terms of what they organize around and things concerning the electorate?
Yeah, I think first off, it's thinking about like who gets a seat at the table, right? So when we're thinking of Latino issues, right, I don't subscribe to just representation being the most important thing, but I think it's a start, right? So if we can include, right, the Asian Latino experience, and we're thinking through like a broader Latino experience, there is no one way to live that. But I think if we're starting to include all these other diverse perspectives into what we want collectively, then some progress can happen, right? But it's also, right, a lot of what mixed race literature is battling with is this idea of, right, the in-between, right? I'm sitting in between different communities. For Asian Latinos, right, it's not just sitting between the Asian or Asian American community or the Latino community, it's also sitting in the context of the US, right? And so how are you fitting, or how are you allowing mixed folks to come into these conversations? And this doesn't just apply to Asian Latinos, right? It applies to all mixed folks who are often pushed away from even their own communities, right? When you are, right, for lack of better words, if you're in the US functions in a very monoracial society, right? So we move everything very boxed, so black, white, Asian, Native or Indigenous, right? Everything is very boxed in this country, and so we don't make space for that mixed experience. And when we do, right, when we're in those organizing spaces, it's often, oh, you're not enough of this, we're not going to take your experience, right? But Asian Latinos are Asian, are Latino, and there also are Asian Latino, right? That's a different experience, but also that doesn't mean that you don't belong to either of your communities. And so that gets difficult, and I think touching back to the previous question of how do we move forward as a collective with the Latino community, I think it's understanding that right now in the present, Latino doesn't function as a political label. And so because of how diverse it is and how much everybody else was talking about right now, right? There's class, there's citizenship status, there's where you were born, generation, and when you came to the US, right? And so all that you mix into just this broader definition of Latino, which by definition is just someone of Latin American descent. That is a very, very broad term in which you're not encompassing the struggles that people might have. And so I think if we're going to think about including, right, Asian Latinos into the Latino perspective or conversation, we have to really think about what does it mean to be Latino in 2025, right? What does it mean to be that in this social context right now where it is rapidly diversifying and we don't have a grasp as to a collective issues that we are pushing forward with, right? Maybe it's immigration, right? But that still differs from generation to generation. And so I think it's thinking through how can we potentially politicize something like Latino, where we are centered around issues for our working class communities, for our immigrant communities, right? And just a quick example of how that's been done before, right? In the 70s and 80s, or 60s to the 80s, and still more presently, like the Chicano movement, right? Chicanos were, by definition, Chicanos are Mexican American, right? But Chicanos decided to identify as Chicano and not Mexican American because Chicano during that time was a political ideology. And so when you identified as Chicano, you identified with the working class, with the immigrant communities, and you worked collectively towards finding some way to support the community as a whole. And yes, there's problems with that movement itself, but for some time it was a political label. And I don't think right now in the present, Latino is a political label in the sense that we have a collective interest for everybody who can identify as Latino, not just a certain image of Latino, which tends to be just the mestizo.
Woo!
Boy.
I mean, Dr. Contaminated, master class, professor, and she's up here teaching the people. So hold your questions because I gotta make your comment because
Moderator.
listen, he is just saying everything that I haven't had the vocabulary or the words to say but have felt. Latino doesn't function as a political identity really anymore if we really think about it. The origin of Latino identity was really brought together as a political identity. So that, from what I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, Latino identity was really some of the Latin American countries as Spain was losing their stronghold and the Latin American countries were becoming independent. There was this movement for this Latinidad, we're all one, we're all the same, because they really, the mestizos and the, I'm gonna say colonizers that were left to run the countries, the elites that were left in powers of position, wanted to get the people of African descent and the indigenous people involved with the fight. They needed the bodies to participate in fighting any other European invasions of the country, so it became this romantic label of Latinidad, somos Latinos Unidos, so I just wanted to touch on that. I know we got a couple of comments. Let me go with the gentleman in the black t-shirt first and then you in the red after.
He made me think of something in dealing with like mixed race people where they fit in. And I've really been impressed by mixed race people that seem less confused, but that are more adamant than I am. This and that, I will be in this space or that space, and I'm not going to apologize to anybody.
Right.
Versus the confused, I don't know what I am, where
Right.
I belong.
And you have a point, but and I'm sure you'll concur with this, that also depends on how your mixed race expresses itself. Is it expressing itself physically? Are you living a black experience, but you're mixed race black, but you appear to have more of a physical phenotype of African, right? So it also depends, to your point, what's your lived experience, because most, and I'll just share this again as a black American Latina, being African American and Puerto Rican, I'm only looked at as sort of mixed race by African American people. The majority, the broader Latino community just see me as black. They don't see, I'm not even seen as, I don't like to use the word mulata because it's derogatory, but you understand what mulata is. They don't even see me that way. They just see me as black. That's been my lived experience here in Los Angeles. Creole. You'll see. So then you got those that if you're from Louisiana, you might look at me as, Creole, so you kind of understand there's some blending of some European somewhere there, right?
I just wanted to add, I also want to invite you to think about that for a lot of people that came here, there is a real spirit, there's a real attitude to make us wonder if we're really from here. What makes someone from here, if you think about it? So for the people that are mixed race, born here, they're like, yeah, I'm from here, and so. And I mean, look at where we are, that we're challenging, our government is challenging, that if you are born here, which is in the constitution of this country, but if your parents are not, maybe you're not so from here.
It's like a fight over the ownership of the land, which really belongs to the indigenous people of the land.
Exactly. So it's really hard sometimes, and as a former undocumented student, like I've been there where I'm like, well, I was here like a long time ago, and I feel like if they send me back to go there, I don't know if I'm from there anymore.
Right.
So then it becomes very confusing, and the people pleasing is real, because then you're like, do I vote for this person that is for that people or those people? Who is my people?
From different community members around, I think it was LA County, and it's interesting on how and where each person comes from according to the DNA. And for example, she did it, and according to her DNA test, she is 100% from where is it? American
continent.
The American continent.
Only the American continent.
Yes. And then other members have some Asian in them that actually were neighbors, were community neighbors. So when they did this DNA test, and I was amazed, and I was like, are you sure? So my next step was, should I do a DNA test too? Because I do know that my ancestors, some of them came from Europe. I know that for them. Because my grandfather looks completely different, than what I look. So we were discussing, and that's why I wanted to just add that.
There was a rallying around the candidate, not necessarily the party. Like, meaning that, you know what I mean? That it was rallying around the candidate, not necessarily the party.
I was in Mexico last month, and Uber driver was asking me, what did I think about everything that happened, and I gave him my opinion, but then he said, there was somebody that just came down from the United States, and I asked him the same question, like, what did you think about the election? And he said, well, and obviously the guy that had been down there was Mexican, right? The other rider, the Uber driver had given him a ride. And he says, it's just not fair that newly arrived immigrants are getting all these benefits. I mean, immigrant himself, right?
Right.
If this guy, if this demagogue is able to make that kind of feeling out of, like, get this inconsistency in thinking, it's
Sure, it can, it creates challenges, that's what I'll say. And something I watched this, I saw a documentary on Prime Amazon, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a little documentary about the Latino vote. I don't know if anybody saw it. Like, they showed, it was about the recent election and people organizing Latino groups for both sides, for both the two parties. They showed, the blue side, the red side, everything from the Mexicanos in Los Angeles to Cubanos in Miami to Puerto Ricanos, Dominicanos in Pennsylvania to those who were part of the church. And I thought it was just, I thought it was fascinating. I think so, yes. And so there's only 3 fact-checking sites in Spanish. And one of the things, and just to your point, right, one of the things, and this is something that we'll talk about, is that the other thing is that, Spanish news is also fairly limited. And then if we're saying Spanish fact-checking sites are only 3 sites, that's also very limited. Yeah. So it's a lot of misinformation. It's not a lot of access to truthful information, so that this is, again, not going into my opinion, but it's facts. There's not enough access for the Spanish-speaking community for fact-checking to make educated decisions. Fully informed, fully educated decisions.
I think it's almost impossible to get the truth to bring sense to people. It's not the truth, I think it's somebody that knows that it's eloquent, that it's able to connect with people. Obama would have beat Trump. Because Obama was good.
Flag on the field. No, I'm kidding. No, I understand. But I'm leaning into the availability of information. That's what informs people, is what kind of information is available to them. What are they reading? What are they hearing? That informs those decisions. Go ahead, Aura.
I also heard you kind of, throwing into the conversation, how people voted. The kind of information we get, is it true, is it not true, was the person charismatic, did they have a lot of money? And I can tell you, as a person that have run for office, money is a big, huge component, if it's not the main component, sadly, in our political process. Like, having money is very important to be able to win and, and craft a good campaign. But also, let's not forget that a lot of that rhetoric about, like, you guys came and you're taking all the resources, you're stealing the jobs. Like, that's not the first or the last we have heard that. Also, there's a lot of people in America that have immigrated here that I'm able to vote now that had some traumatic political experience in their native country. I'm looking at my sister right here with Venezuela. I'm looking at Colombia, for example. I'm looking in Latin America. And Central America. There's a lot of people that have immigrated here. I'm like, hell no. Never whatever is happening at home. Cubans. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do completely different. And that's kind of where we have landed, and I'm jumping on a lot of historic, but it's very common because a lot of people don't want to come here and end up. I mean, how many times you heard this in election time? You don't want to end up like Venezuela. We don't want the United States to be like Venezuela. And it's just like, you gotta sit sometimes and think about what does that really mean and where it's speaking to. And this like rhetoric that a certain, socialism is bad and this is bad and we're the only good. And unfortunately has created a political landscape that is extremely divided and is favoring not maybe the best person for people, for us,
Great point. Hold your
horses.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask one of my catered questions for you, Aura, too, kind of just rolling into, as we're starting to see more movements around climate justice, environmental justice, and really understanding that, because I just really started understanding it last year. Like, it was also like background noise to me, honestly, until I helped participate with curating a panel about environmental justice and start talking to experts in these fields, and learn, just even in places in Latin America, like somebody had mentioned, well, no, we didn't mention it here, but most know in Latin America, the poorest communities are the indigenous and the Black communities. And in my opinion, the Blacks are always on the bottom, on the complete bottom in those communities, right? But also access to clean water. It affects the indigenous and the Black communities within Latin America. But guess what? Access to clean water, Flint, Michigan, that's a predominantly Black area, So as those kind of conversations are coming more to the forefront, and there are those that are kind of resistant to it. My question for Aura, being this is kind of your space that you've developed some muscle in, do you think the political climate someone grows up in, be it tied to environmental justice, immigration, or just access to resources, do you believe that shapes their voting behavior? And then how do you see these factors intersecting with Latino diversity?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Earlier, I was mentioning that people, act for what affects them. I think also in the United States, there's a rhetoric that Latinos only care about immigration, that's their main issue, and the Latinos care about economic issues, like cost of living, how much groceries, they're going up and down. Crime is a big one. We want to have a community that is safe. So in that sense, we are definitely shaped to vote in a certain way, and we kind of saw it in 2024 in the elections, where we experienced the hottest year on record, not just in Los Angeles, but in the whole world. We experienced the hottest summer and winter, in record. We saw the, Antarctica and like all the poles melting, literally melting. You can go on YouTube and you see it melt. We saw seawater rise level. We saw hurricanes and superstorms in places where they never happened. Also now affecting rich people. We saw wildfires. We saw drought. We saw a lot of these, but you talked about, you didn't hear any of this in the middle of the campaign trail, did you? It was all about how much these people were gonna come and take everything from you, and we needed all of them out of here, and all this fear mongering that it just becomes a weapon, for people on how to they divide us and they bring us together for certain things. So absolutely, the people that that felt that that was their self-interest and didn't see that breathing clean air was affecting them directly. That in Los Angeles, we have not complied with the Clean Air Act since 1979. That's 45 years, that people have not been breathing clean air. So when you start thinking about that, it's like, why are people voting for these things? Because again, we have a community that is not homogeneous, that sometimes they're working 3 jobs and they're trying to get ahead, where they, specifically in Los Angeles, we went over a pandemic where a lot of people will walk out of their apartments and they will see homeless people camping in their streets. And, we love them and we want to treat them right, but not here. Please don't show me what you're going to do with them. But, unfortunately, that's a lot of times the attitude, that people have. And it was a tough situation. Like, I remember I ran for office last year, and I remember going door knocking, speaking to other Latinos, Peruvians. I spoke to an Ecuadorian, and I remember them telling me, we have been Democrats forever. We're not doing it again. I was undocumented. I don't want them here. And I was just perplexed, at their door, talking to them and hearing them say that they don't see their experience as something that, the experience of the immigrant, like they don't see themselves in the immigrant experience as they vote, which is fascinating to me, like how can you forget how hard it is? But these are the realities, that people also see assimilation and getting closer to a certain group that is in power, that have more money, that look a certain way, as an upper mobility. That you're like, oh, well, now I'm better than you, that you just came here, what are you doing here? So, like we can't forget, and in terms of environmental issues, it's extremely painful for me to watch. It almost feels like I'm abandoned, alone in some ship in the middle of the ocean by myself, to be honest, oftentimes, because even now, we just saw the most catastrophic fire affecting Los Angeles County. We all saw it. It affected low-income people and affected rich people, both of them. And you'll think that we're gonna stop and say, hold up, what made the situation possible? The drought, the wind, the fact that we have not had rain. Today is the first time that we're gonna have rain in our winter. Hopefully. And you think that we're gonna stop and think about these things. No, but instead, we lifted all of the environmental protections so that we can clean and rebuild. And I'm like, are you guys gonna do this again? That is like the definition of insanity. Like you mean to tell me you're gonna replant the same plants that caused all the fire, and you're gonna, build homes in the same way you did, and nobody's gonna say anything, and it's just being really hard to swallow.
So segue, I got a question for you, and then I'm gonna pass it to the Isai over there, patiently waiting. But things that as you're talking, what I hear, a continued message amongst all of us, amongst our attendees, is trauma. Lots and lots of trauma of colonialism. Period. What happens with trauma is people respond to trauma and crisis differently. There's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Either you're gonna fight or you're gonna freeze. I'm not gonna do nothing about it. You're gonna take off, run, get out of it, or you fawn. Fawn is people please. I'm gonna just go with the status quo because I don't want no problem. So yes, hit me over the head, take my whole family from me. More please, another one, sir, right? And so that's a lot to unpack in that. But then Aura, hello, I'm Aura. Looking for more, just a quick short answer, because just honestly a personal curiosity for me. As someone like yourself, you're so extremely passionate about climate change, environmental justice. Like, that's not something I grew up with, being educated about or concerned. Like, what created that passion in you? Did you experience something in Colombia? You know, like what brought that out? More than a short answer, just curious about that. Like, what rose that up inside you?
Yeah, so for context, I grew up in Colombia. I grew up in a small town next to Cali. Cali is like the third biggest city in Colombia. Also, Cali hosts the second largest Afro-Latino descent community in Latin America. So there's a lot of Black Latinos there, you know? And
Is Cali the second home of heaven?
yeah, Cali, somos los salseros, you know, we dance a lot over there, you know, have a good time. But also, Cali is very agricultural. So we depend on sugarcane exports and sugarcane for like our livelihoods. Like a lot of people work in the sugarcane plantations, and obviously it makes total sense that there's a lot of Black folks there, right? So I grew up seeing my mother cleaning, you know, ash. This was an everyday thing, like a normal thing. I grew up with all of us in my family being sick. We would wake up and sneeze, asthma, coughing, like constant. Everybody in town is sick. Because, you know, I also grew up, my parents telling me stories about a river that we have in our town that is completely, like it's just mud now. And they grew up going to that river and swimming and telling stories, you know, and making it like this Sunday kind of afternoon kind of thing to do in town. And now I will never go there, it smells terrible. You know, so when you grow up like kind of seeing all those things, I'm thinking about like, well, what is going on? And then in school, in my early days, learning about the ozone layer and global warming in those days, you know, I don't want to outdate myself here, but, you know, in the days of global warming, then you start putting all the things together. And for me, it became very clear that the very people that was feeding us were also making us sick, you know, and I became a child activist on environmental issues at a very young age. 11 years old, I went and I founded the first environmental club in my school. You know, I spoke about these things, and this is kind of been my crusade, and now I'm 46 years old, and I've done a lot of things that I'm very proud of, and a lot of change, but my change has been so small, you know, compared to the magnitude of the problem, you know, that we have. And I can't believe just these past 2 weeks I've been talking nothing but about global warming and climate change, and we're still here. And now we have an administration that doesn't want to recognize climate issues, that is trying to dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency, that is also attacking DEI, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of these things are interconnected, because once you love yourself, you love Mother Earth, you love your neighbor, you know, you understand how important this is.
I love that. Thank you, and then I'll hand over to Isai, but what it made me think about is the constant messages here is lived experience. That's her lived experience. That's not the lived experience of the wealthy people, so that's not necessarily a concern. You know? I liken it to just even my identity as Afro-Latinidad. That's my lived experience. It might not be the concern of a non-Black Latino, you know, to rally for the equity that we're looking for within our community, you know, and so it's sad to say, but people also navigate in a space of what we call cognitive dissonance, right? It's happening to you, but it ain't happening to me, so until it happens to me, it's not my problem. Not my monkey, not my circus, is off the time. That's the attitude, right? So thank you for that, Aura. That's absolutely fascinating, and I commend you, you know, for following what the ancestors put on your heart to champion. Awesome. Okay, Isai. I'm learning so much from just this conversation. I'm sorry, I don't even want to say Latino identity to this Oaxacan indigenous brother, because I'm like, that's an oxymoron to me. Like, I'm like, what? Indigenous people are not Latinos. Like, I mean, by definition for me, so nuances, we're talking nuances in Native votes. So Isai, for you, from your perspective as an advocate for indigenous communities, do you think indigenous, I wrote Latinos, but I'm scratching that, do you think indigenous peoples feel represented in the broader Latino political movements, or do they face distinct issues that are often overlooked?
Definitely, there are many things that are overlooked. Sometimes, unfortunately, when someone hears, or they say, "Oh, Latino, he's Latino," he's Latino, or she's Latino. Everyone thinks that we have the same, or we have the same problems, and unfortunately, we don't. As indigenous communities, for example, one of the main things that we do have, or we as a community need, is language access. I think it's one of the things that is really missing, that it's really been overlooked. And not only that, the thing is that sometimes, yes, we probably speak the same language. Yes, we probably speak Spanish, right? But not everyone is the same. That's why when I said my few words, my first word was Zapoteco. But now, does it mean just because I speak Zapoteco and another Zapoteco will understand what I'm saying? No. There's variance in Zapoteco, there's variance in Mixteco, there's variance in different languages. So that's why sometimes what happens is that sometimes people think, oh yeah, let's go and fight for the rights of the Latinos. But what about the indigenous communities, right? What about the because we have Afro-Latines too. And they also have needs. There's an Afro-Latino community here in Pasadena.
Where?
That I just heard.
Where?
I gotta find out where.
Oh, we're gonna have to go get
Yeah. It's a small
We'll
community.
talk about it after. You gotta tell me that.
Definitely, from the coastal state of Oaxaca, from Pinotepa. And it's very interesting because they also have different needs. So whenever someone actually goes out there and votes, sometimes, we're definitely are overlooked on, what our needs are as indigenous communities. So what I would like to say is that, we need to work on this. There's organizations that work on this already, right? But we need more power, we need more orgs to basically partner up and go out there and then ask for these, items that we need.
I love that. And I'll ask you again, from my own learning and understanding, as we're talking about this whole identity of Latinidad, like for me, what is the proper identity for us to, when we're referencing an indigenous person, are we referencing you as indigenous Latino? Is it, for your community? What's the proper way to identify with the indigenous folks, or, how should we be?
Yeah, no, it's just that I think sometimes, I'll be honest with you, some community members are really sensitive. Other communities are okay with it. And what I mean by that is that sometimes it's very important to learn that indigenous communities, yes, we're a community, but we also have our, what do you call this, our history, our way of being, and what we believe in. Like, for example, marriages, right? A marriage in an indigenous community is so different from a marriage that you probably see out there So it is very important sometimes to learn. And how will we identify? Sometimes when we identify, for example, I'll probably say, I'm Zapoteco. It is interesting too, by the way, because sometimes as we grow up, I grew up here in LA County. As I grew up, I was told that I was Latino. I was never told that I was indigenous. Okay, because the group that I belonged in, meaning my generation that I belonged in, was actually attacked, harassed, and also discriminated from my own community, from my own Mexicanos. Okay, they will always say that Oaxaquita, Indio. Those are the terms that they would use, right? So what I want to say sometimes is just say, let the person identify themselves. Mexicano, Zapoteco, Mixteco, Chilango, whatever you like to be identified as. And I just want to go back when I was a kid, because when I was a kid, I was always Oaxacan. I was always Oaxacan. But I had community members that now I learned that they are from Oaxaca too, but at the time they were from Jalisco, from Mexico City, from Puebla, but never from Oaxaca because they were afraid to be discriminated. So, in short, that's the reason why we have cultural events And one of those cultural events is Guelaguetza. What is Guelaguetza? Guelaguetza is actually a community event, a festival that we celebrate in Oaxaca, where we bring all indigenous communities together to celebrate one day. And that's what we brought here in California. 37 years ago, we brought this event, Guelaguetza. Why? Because we were having that trouble that Oaxaqueños were being discriminated because we were short and brown. And what happened a few years ago, and I'm jumping around, but what happened a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, when city councils, were against Oaxaqueños and they were discriminating. Yes, and we had to step up as Oaxaqueños. Now, jumping back to Guelaguetza. The reason why we emphasize Guelaguetza is because we try to teach new generations where they come from, who they are, what's their background. And you will see nowadays in graduations or other events, you will see a lot of students that they're proud to be Oaxacan. They will be using, their camisas, their huipiles, because they're proud to be from where they are. Now they're starting to learn or try to learn their language, they're from their parents. It could be any other, language, Mixteco, Zapoteco, Chinateco. And it's very important. We're emphasizing this. We're trying to make them teach. We're teaching them to learn that they are indigenous. Yes, they were born here, maybe first generation, second generation, but we're teaching them to be who, where they come from. And no sé si me desvía, I don't know if I. But I just wanted to say, how it is important not to just say or identify, oh yeah, that person is, just let a person identify themselves.
I love that. Thank you. I'm going to roll into that second question. Absolutely. It deserves a clap. Second question for you, Isai, is just, piggybacking on what we're already talking about is cultural preservation. Like, how does the cultural preservation and the celebrating of, the Guelaguetza, or teaching Zapotec traditions, how does that influence political participation among younger generations of the indigenous people? You were just talking about there's a resurgence in pride, with that. How do you think that influences the political participation of those younger generations?
As I mentioned earlier, it is important for the community to teach children where they're from. But we also have to understand that new generations are also learning and assimilating or adapting a new culture. And because they're adapting a new culture, sometimes it's really hard for a student or a child to sometimes understand what their parents went through. Because some of the parents they cross the border, right, illegally. Some parents overstay their visa. But sometimes you have to see that sometimes students learn from their parents, learn from the family. What happens at home is what they show outside to the community. So if we as an indigenous community show our kids and be proud of and tell them to be proud of who they are, that's what they will show to the community outside. And if we show them also, hey, listen, have respect on what to choose or what to do with your community, they will also show it. So one of the things that I do want to say is that sometimes when we go out there and vote, or how we impact the vote, it's based on what they've learned at home. And one of the things that I also wanted to add, because Aura had mentioned earlier, is that sometimes, and I also briefly covered it, we sometimes as not an indigenous community, but outside the indigenous community, we sometimes we discriminate, and sometimes just because I was probably not a resident of the U.S., unfortunately, and it's true, I feel like I made it. I don't care what the other person's suffering. Yeah, maybe I did suffer, a few years ago, but I don't care. And it's so sad because we see it a lot. When I say we see it, it's because my partner and myself, my girlfriend, and I, we belong in organizations where we fight for the rights of indigenous communities. But it's really, really sad when we march and we see a lot of our community and say, join us, come over. And they will be like, oh, no tengo tiempo, está bien. It's like, I don't have time, but it's okay. You continue doing your work. And it's like, but I don't need, to fight for you, but I want to fight for you, but it kind of hurts that you're telling me it's okay, don't worry about it, right? So, in short, we teach our community to do good for others and in the community, and that's what the word Guelaguetza means.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Isai, that I kind of feel like I already know the answer to. So some of the discrimination that the Oaxacan people face, in addition to being indigenous folks, do you also feel like you catch some of that discrimination because Oaxaca is also associated with Black community?
Well, sí y no. Yes and no. The thing is that sometimes, hold on one second. Can you repeat that question? Because I might have misunderstood it.
Yeah, absolutely. So most Mexicanos that I talk to, when I talk about the Afro-Mexican community, that's Oaxaca, Veracruz, as if Oaxaca and Veracruz is not part of Mexico. Like it's just this small, they're like a whole country in their own. So my question as an indigenous, non-Afro identifying person, when we think of the Black community in Mexico, it is Oaxaca, it is Veracruz. Do you feel like you catch, some of that discrimination is because, you might be Afro-descendant, so there's the anti-Blackness element. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and we do.
You get caught in that crossfire is I guess my question.
Yes, we do, and it's very, very interesting because in our certain communities I'm from the Sierra Norte of the state of Oaxaca.
Puebla?
Close to, yes, second of Veracruz, getting close to Veracruz. And and our community, it's really interesting because half of our community will be light skinned and the other half will be dark skinned. Some of them are darker than me. So do we actually get that the discriminated? Yes. I'm sorry. And the interesting thing is that in our communities we started rebuilding the mentality because it was really strong and crazy. We're talking about like in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. When I was born, right, it was just crazy with this, people being discriminated in our own town. But now what we're trying to do now is with each different community, we're trying to actually remind them that we're the same people.
Decolonize.
And it's very, very important that we're doing that. Nowadays, we're talking about maybe during the pandemic, our communities, I'm talking about all the neighboring communities from where I'm from, we have decided that we're going to start teaching again our native language. Okay? And it's important. Why? Because we noticed that now it's important because now no one wants to discriminate us compared to what before. Oh, ese indio, viene del pueblito ese. A little Indian. He's coming from that little small town. And now it's not because that Indian now, he's smart. And we gotta be careful now on how he fits.
I love that. Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just, again, learning so much. I want to kind of share a little insight just as we're talking about, the different identities and representations, even within the Afro-Latino identity, there's kind of, and I'm still in your wordy side, immersion, right? There's this immersion of Afro-Latino versus Black Latino, right? So there's conversations within our community for someone that, because, not all Afro-Latinos are mixed. There's kind of a misconception that Afro-Latino means you're mulatto, maybe, like you're half Black and something else, and that's not true. Afro-Latinos, there are unambiguously Black folks that are, Afro-Latino that are basically persons of predominantly African descent. So there's even conversations within our community where we're making sure that there's space for the unambiguously Black Latinos, and so we're leaving space for identity as Black Latino, not Afro-Latino. Because when we say Afro-Latino, there's conversations, again, it's emerging, it's developing, as languages, developing, leaving space for the identity of Afro-Latino to be someone that's more of lighter skin, or like an Afro-Indigenous person like Aura, right? To okay, I'm not unambiguously black necessarily, but I do identify as predominantly black. I am living a black experience, you know, but it leaves that space to be able to identify as Afro-Latino. So just sharing that, even within that context of just how we're all, you know, just trying to, and that goes into the mixed race, you're right, the mixed race concept of identities is that this is a fluid conversation. You know, it's no longer, we're moving out the space of it just being this 1, 2, 3 box, and that's it. And if you don't fit into these 1, 2, 3 box, then you're not really a Latino, right? I mean, I even brought my shirt. Yes, I speak Spanish. Because my experience growing up in Los Angeles as a Spanish bilingual person, I'm telling you, I will get at every time I speak Spanish in public. Every time, it never fails. You speak Spanish? No, estoy hablando japonés. You know, I'll tell them, no, I'm speaking in Japanese. Like so true story. So I have my Puerto Rican side. One of my cousins is more mestiza, very, very white Puerto Rican, light eyes. We're sitting at a restaurant, you know, in LA, of all places, and you know, we're talking in Spanish because we're kind of gossiping, and I don't want my American friends to hear what we're talking about. Y prima, tú sabes qué? Ta, 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 ta. Waiter comes over, non-black Hispanic gentleman, and he's getting ready to take our drink order, and we're in a full-on conversation. He interrupts to look at me. You speak Spanish? And my cousin was like she's my first cousin, like. Her daddy is my daddy's little brother, like true story. And that's where I came up with my you know, I'm a smart aleck. I was like, no, estoy hablando en japonés. She's a big mouth. She was just like, he got so embarrassed, but just kind of, again, just sharing lived experiences of how something as simple as just being racially black within the Latin identity is I'm othered all the time. I've had experiences where I've gone into Mexico, I've gone into cantinas, I'll go into restaurants, and obviously they can tell maybe I'm American, right? And they're probably, I don't know if they're used to African Americans. My Spanish is pretty good, maybe not for a panel discussion, but my Spanish is pretty good. So I'll order in Spanish, and I have on several occasions when I went to, what part of Mexico was I in? I forget what part I was in. One of the popular, Cabo San Lucas. And several times, including a cab driver, when I'm giving instructions in Spanish, you can speak to me in English. I speak in English, okay? Like angry that I'm a racially black person, like they feel mocked. It was incredible, and I'm like, now I gotta qualify, now I gotta explain myself, now I gotta share my whole dang DNA background, where my daddy from, where my mama from, just to justify why I speak Spanish. Because they're sitting here insult. And so it's so strange, just kind of all of our different lived, you know, experiences that whether you're a white Latino, you may experience the same thing. Blonde hair, blue eyes, you're speaking Spanish. An indigenous person from Latin America might be like, oh, you're speaking Spanish? Like you might get the same thing. So I just think it's important. I want to make sure that the Afro-Latino experience and voice is also elevated in this conversation. And what I love is just the solidarity and the shared experiences that we still all have, no matter what our racial background is, whether we're U.S. born, non-U.S. born. So we're close to time here. I do want to open it up for questions, or is there any comments from our panelists here? Any closing comments from our panelists, and then we'll go to our. You want me to go to the audience? Okay. So any questions or comments from the audience? Go ahead. Armanda. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You wanna?
Yeah. Come on.
Step to the mic.
But I love the diverse conversation that you guys were having today. It was so awesome to hear. I'm second generation Afro-Latina, with my mother being from Louisiana Creole, and actually like discounting all of my dad's Latin background and say like he is not Hispanic whatsoever. He's 100% black. And from the beginning of our conversation, how we were talking about, or you guys were talking about, just the fear mongering politically, and knowing that there are Indigenous, Latina, and some of us Black people from Louisiana that can, what we call as pass, right? Do you find some of the conversation being around people wanting to change their identities just to be able to claim some sort of safety in this new political area? And what kind of advice do you have to the younger generations that may not have to navigate this and can see, you know, even some of their friends of one being able to pass and change their identity and other people not being able to do so?
I want Dr. Kevin to take that.
Not
Thank
a
you.
doctor yet.
Hey, we're speaking into existence, brother. That's what we do here.
We are
Yeah, I think a lot of the narrative is changing around having to choose when to identify as one or the other. I think that's changing, I think, with more recent generations. I think me speaking personally, to survive the bullying I faced growing up, I would sometimes identify with one or the other, depending on the context. Now I don't, and I understand the context of why I used to do that, but I understand now how harmful that is. And I think it goes back to a conversation I think that Asai was saying in a different idea of how language is important, access to your identities, to your cultures, to be able to own that in a way that you can move yourself forward. And the gentleman over here, who's standing up with the question next, also brought that to the attention that there's younger generations are now owning that they are mixed, right? Or they're, I think again to what Asai was saying, just ask the person how they were choosing to identify. We, I think, can move forward collectively in a much more holistic way if we just choose to speak with the person as opposed to making these assumptions of how they identify, because I think that helps you root and understand where they are coming from more so than making these assumptions that, oh, you're this or you're only this or you're only that. All to say it is difficult, right? Because then you get hit with all those follow-ups of, oh, why do you speak this language? Why do you look like that? Where's your mom from? Anecdotally, my partners here, sometimes her family will ask me after they've known me for 7 years now, oh, you speak Spanish? And it's like, I've been speaking Spanish to you for 7 years. But then you meet me again, and not in a shameful way or anything. I love her family, but it's things like that you have to constantly remind people that, hey, just because I don't look the way you assume someone is coming from your community looks like, that doesn't mean that I'm not part of this community as well.
Did you want to say that?
Yeah, I want to add that this needs to be, and as you're asking, you know, what's the advice for young people? Like, and this is advice, I think, for everyone. We need to do a real soul search about decolonizing our minds, because it's so ingrained. And you know, not to call my family out, but I did grow up in a household when I heard things like "Cásate con un gringo," because you're gonna do better. Marry a white person, marry a foreigner.
Mejorar
la raza was something that was very out there for me growing up, and it took a real soul search. And my dad is black, you know, and there was a real erasure of my dad being black in my family. You know, like they talk about black people like it was them, not like it was us. Like, you know, like my dad wasn't black, or like my aunt didn't look like the lady that was sitting, the Venezuelan lady was, you know, like, and that is a real thing that we have, or I had to deal with later in life, to be like, well, how am I being biased? You know, with like all of this unpacking that I need to do with things growing up. So I see a mom here with their child, and I am just so happy and proud that at least he's not on an iPad right now, but he's somewhat getting this energy and listening to what we're saying and somehow getting educated about our culture, you know. But I think that social media play a crucial role, you know, also to understand who you are and how all those things have affected you and how you can educate future generations for the better.
I love that. Thank you. 2 quick funny stories. I swear I got to share these with you because I know there's so much absurdities that I've heard personally. So 2 things I'm going to share real quick of how we get othered, and then I'll also answer a question and we'll pass it to the gentleman that's at the mic there. So true story. Had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with this gentleman who's unambiguously black, but he's African American and Cuban. You know, when I say unambiguously, I mean dark skin, black, doesn't look mixed. And so we're talking because he wants to help volunteer with my organization. So this is my first phone call to him. He knows I'm African American and Puerto Rican, and we're talking, and I think he grew up in, Miami, and to me, he speaks, like an American, very, what we say, proper English, he speaks very proper. So for me, that was funny because he talks spirit, like if I turn off the camera, I'm not talking to a black man type of thing is what I'm saying. I said nothing. He's looking at me, he's like, I gotta say something. I was like, what? And it's the first time I ever heard this in my life, but it spoke to what I already knew. He's like, it's funny talking to you and hearing your accent. I was like, what accent? He's like, well, you talk like LA. I said, well, I'm from LA. I'm born and raised in South Central on the east side. He goes, no, but I'm not used to Afro-Latinos that talk like you. Again, because Afro-Latinos are viewed as people that come from the East Coast, so if I'm not talking like Cardi B, or I don't have a Spanish accent, then I'm not really Latino. And then I cut into another quick experience that I had, true story, about 15 years ago, with an African American friend of mine. We walk into a Vaughn's grocery store in Inglewood. We're pulling up to the cashier, and I'm looking at this cashier, and I'm like, my gosh, she could be my twin sister. I am not lying. We're the same complexion. She got the same face, same lips as me, eyes, same hair texture, everything. And he was like, he looking at her, he looking at me, he goes, you checked on your daddy lately? Where your daddy at? Because undeniably, this girl looked like she could be my twin sister. So I'm excited, because automatically I'm knowing, this is a Puerto Rican girl, you know what I'm saying? And when we see each other, we're like, hey, if I'm in the traffic and I see a Puerto Rican flag, I'm like, bah, bah, Boricua, we don't say, and that's here in LA. So I'm excited. I'm getting ready to pull up to the cashier to say, are you Puerto Rican? Because I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm like, hey, she's boop, boop, and I was like, so, you Puerto Rican? She was like, yeah, how you know? I was like, because I'm Puerto Rican. She's like, you are? I was like, yeah. She's like, where are you from? I was like, I'm from LA. She goes, oh, but I'm a real Puerto Rican. I'm from New York. I'm like, where's your parents from? My mom's from New York. My grandma's from New York. We're real Puerto Ricans. I was like, my papi's from Peñuelas, Puerto Rico, directamente. Are we seeing who's more Puerto Rican than who? So again, you understand what I'm saying? We talk about cultural mapping. We talk about those things where we don't think certain communities exist. And I share that to say the learnings for me, for the youth, is stand 10 toes down on your identity. Don't let nobody intimidate you, bully you into, picking one side over another, because it's also fluent. We're exploring ourselves. Colonization was for 500 years. We didn't even been free or independent longer than we were enslaved and colonized. So we're still trying to connect with ancestors, connect with language, connect with find lost cultures. I'm 20% Taino. I just found out through DNA. I know nothing about that, but the ancestry and the blood's in me. So I just share with, don't let anybody put you in a box, and that's my advice to people. Gentlemen at the mic.
Thank you guys so much.
You can
Oh, man.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm really enjoying this. My dad's side of the family comes from Louisiana. I really got interested in a lot of Latino things, not really understanding the history of Louisiana. But in reflection, I said, okay, now I get it. French Empire, Spanish Empire there, and the culture is influenced by those things. But one of the things that happened to me, what I really wanted to bring up, is I worked the 2020 census, and the gentleman from Suffolk kind of reminded me of what I realized in speaking to different Latinos, and when it came to race, the whole culture thing, Latino, Hispanic, which basically says you're beyond the British Empire, no problem. But when we came to race, there were brown people saying they were white. I'm like, what the heck? And then there were brown people that didn't want to say they were white. They couldn't find themselves there.
Right.
So then I'm like, okay, we got a problem here. Now in the African American community, it's a big joke, right? We were once colored. We were once Negro. We were once black. We were once now African American. Every 10 years, the joke is we change. Well, the reason we change is because that's when you get to fine tune the census.
Right.
And so that hasn't been happening in the Latino community, especially for indigenous people. The only indigenous box you can check is under Native American. And
Which
so,
we are still Native American, because
Yes.
America's a continent, first of all.
yeah, but we're getting into the politics of the U.S.
Yeah. I said it.
But
I don't care.
I would just want to encourage the community that you can get involved in those categories on the census. It's so heartbreaking that someone indigenous to this continent doesn't have a box for themselves to check, and that's wrong.
And I want to say there's been a big fight about that because also it represents resources. The census means resources for wherever each community, in each area represents how many delegates. It's a big thing. And I remember in the 2020 census, and I would love to hear your take on this too. There was a huge thing because Afro-Latinos, like, how do you name yourself? I have to always say that I'm white.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I'm
actually,
really not white, you know?
you don't have to. Once you pick Hispanic or Latino,
Why are you picking white? Hold on. I'm gonna take that one. I'm
any
curious.
category.
Yeah, no. Why are you picking white?
No, last time I picked black, but I remember.
So you switching up like Michael Jackson?
Back 10 years ago in 2010 when I participated in the other census, the advice actually was well, since you don't have a category, you're white.
That's gonna require another panel, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, please.
Yeah, because that's the challenge within the Latino community, obviously, and when we start going into mixed race, and I will say that is a big fight because they are trying to change the definition of Hispanic Latino, make it seem like a race. So there's Afro-Latino organizations that right now are fighting because they believe it's erasure, just complete erasure of indigenous and black people. Because when we talked about in the beginning that we discovered that Latino is this identity that's not really working, but then the powers that be are still fighting to just force this into one monolith. So that's kind of, I just want to make sure I add that. But you can finish up, and then we have the gentleman behind you in the yellow.
In fact, a job application today, just for the heck of it, I picked that I was Hispanic or Latino, and it blocked out every racial category.
Yeah.
But on the census, you're not allowed to do that. And on the census, you can pick multiple boxes. But the community has to get involved with the Census Bureau to get that indigenous category, whatever it is, to get it put onto the next census.
Oh yeah, agree. And good point. I'm going to share this last point, and then gentlemen, and I know we're at time here, but U.S. Census has been a pain in my knickers for just forever. So one thing, a misnomer to me, is within the Latino community, they love, the broader Latino community calls Puerto Rico a white island. Oh, I can't stand it. Have you heard that? Who's heard that? No, nobody's heard that? There's conversations where even some of the black Cubans and stuff, Puerto Rico's a white island. And I'm like, because there was these research from these professors at certain universities in Puerto Rico that released this demographics of what is the average Puerto Rican. The average Puerto Rican is 76%, Castellano, and 12% African, and 15%. So they've taken that because what the heck does an average Puerto Rican mean? Do we say that the average American is white when we know that white is the largest population here? So it's nonsense how we use we weaponize statistics and data, and I share that. Another thing is just two jokes. So what I know about, and I can speak for Puerto Rico, is that people don't understand the census, especially in a Spanish-speaking country with Puerto Rico being a U.S. territory. So you had unambiguously black Puerto Ricanos in the 40s and 50s checking off their race as white because they thought they were gonna get benefits if they said they're white. They didn't understand what the purpose of the census were. They literally like, well, white is better, white is richer, white gets more benefits. And so and then that's where it ties into calling Puerto Rico a white island, because they're basing it on what? Census data. But we have on record where black Puerto Ricans were checking off white because there was assumption they would get benefits. Last true story, just my lived experience. So me and my brother being African American and Puerto Rican, we was going through this colorism things between the two of them. I'm little Gary. Let me just tell you right now, if you listening, brother, I'm talking about you. We look like twins. We can pass twins. They call me little Gary all the time. So as children, because we were being ripped apart, from our culture, he would always say, I look more Puerto Rican than you. You just black. I'm talking, we twins. Same hair texture, same complexion. I got his face, he got my face. No difference, literally. I think his hair is actually a little more kinkier than mine, right? And so this is when we're like 9, 10, 11, and 12. Well, one day my nosy self go digging in my parents' papers because I'm looking for baptism certificate. I've always been curious about that. So I find our birth certificates. Now my brother, born in 1969, I'm 72. On my brother's birth certificate, he's born in LA. It says his daddy white. Caucasian. Mother black. I pull my birth certificate, my dad's Puerto Rican. Case closed. Gary, your daddy white. You half white. It says it on paper. That stopped that conversation. And again, just, talking just anecdotal, information that just leads to again, the U.S. Census, how we categorize, how even hospitals will racialize your children on birth certificates. They don't ask you. The doctor looks at you, looks at the daddy, if daddy's around, looks white to me, looks white, So anyway, I just wanted to share that. Last question from the gentleman. Toby.
There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you all to all the panelists. You guys have been fantastic. So this has been a really great discussion. I wanted to share actually a small story, and then maybe you guys can comment on it. And we've been talking a bit about the Latino vote, and every election year. Well, first of all, my background, Mexican American and German Polish, and so I consider myself multiracial as well as Mexican and Latino, and, as well as German Polish and white. And so every election year that comes around, you get the phone calls or those texts asking for your opinions on surveys. And most of the time I ignore them because they're really annoying, they take forever. But every now and then I'll answer them just to say, what are they asking, what do they want to know about? And I go through all the surveys, answering the questions on this issue, that issue, etc. But I always know at some point there's going to be this really cringy question where they ask me, what is my race? How do I identify? And I ask them, can I select more than one? And they say no. Huh?
The census
you can. And we can talk about the census forever. I've been working with the census for decades as well. So I got lots of opinions, and we can go into the history of that. But I'm talking about political surveys like Gallup poll or whoever, whoever is doing the survey. And this is what they get reported on the news. This is how Latinos are voting. This is what the Latino vote is. And it's cringy for me because being mixed race, I have to stop and I do this quick calculation in my head. How do I want all of my answers to be reported? Do I want my opinions to be counted as the white vote, or do I want my opinions to be counted as the Latino vote? Because they don't allow me to pick more than one. And so there's a level of reduction there, and there's a lack of detail that we're just missing. And one final thing, looking at census data, there are ways to interpret it where as much as a quarter to a third of the Latino community could be considered multiracial for checking more than one boxes, some other race and other races. And so, you could look at the Latino vote and you look at the statistics and you could kind of interpret it all kinds of different ways. And I think there's just a huge misunderstanding of how Latinos feel about issues, and I think there's other races that are conflated with the Latino vote, and the Latino vote is being conflated with other races because of that. So I'm just wondering, I don't know, have you encountered that, or what are your thoughts about when they say what the Latino vote is, given that it is so diverse, and yet none of that's being recognized?
Anyone want to take that? Come on, Professor Kevin, the good doctor, all that.
Kevin, I'm just gonna, before you go, I think this is what we spoke about at the very beginning of this conversation. That oftentimes we are all looping one big soup. And we're not all the same. We're not socioeconomically the same, we're not ethnically the same, we're not culturally the same, we're not even in faith. You know, our faith background is not the same. So, as a political person, I hate those surveys because I think they skew people the wrong way, and it has become very dangerous. You know, at some point, you guys remember the George Floyd days, you know, the pandemic. I was getting, you know, like Latinos like safety. We want to be hard in crime. I'm like, okay, like which ones? Because we have members of our community that will die before they call the police. That they're literally scared for their lives. That in fact they're underreport crime. Domestic violence being one, because they just don't want to interact with law enforcement. So, you know, so we can't generalize. So that's just my take. And as a political person, I find these surveys just pure manipulation sometimes. Depends on what kind of questions you ask, how you ask the question, who you ask the question. And then, you know, I find it very manipulative, just personally.
You want to take that, Kevin? Do you need to repeat the question? You want to repeat the question? We're just talking about surveys. You want to repeat your question? Just kind of, you're talking about the surveys and racially mixed identities, how do they?
Yeah, how mixed race identity but is not recognized in the surveys, and how there's a lack of detail below like the main categories to really provide context and nuance to people's opinions.
And would it be like, what's the advice for somebody that's mixed race, maybe even?
I just
What's
have
our
thoughts.
take?
I just
What's
want
our
your
thoughts on the
feelings
surveys,
that.
thoughts on those type of
Yeah.
surveys, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the U.S. Census, understanding that they're a reflection of where we're at currently, right? So each form has changed over the decade, right? No form looks the same, and it often is a reflection of that time, right? So, for example, right, the category of Latino is a relatively new categorization, right? The use of Hispanic or the use of Spanish speaking over different decades, and so it's important to understand. I think to your point of how you're going to be reflected in that form. So, right, because the census is a reflection of society, but it's also a reflection of material resources that communities receive, right? And so,
And the other part I want to stress is the community's involvement in that. You're not just an observer. When the community gets involved, indigenous people from so-called Latino countries can be recognized. But if you're just sitting there like, oh, they're doing this to me, they're categorizing me, then it's not going to be
Right.
there.
Sure. One comment back.
Okay, so.
She been quiet this whole time. She got something for y'all. Listen up.
So, as Hagan said, he did the brief intro, I do human rights work for Indigenous organizations also. And we have the Latino Coalition has pushed for SB 1016, which just passed last year, which was to count Indigenous people certain categories. We had to choose down to 10 categories like Che, Zapote, Amperiki, for, let's say, when you do your CalFresh application, to be able to put that you speak Mixteco, or to be able to put that you speak Creek. That was one of the first pushes of that. When you look at the census, you do see that there is categorization of indigenous people. There's around, I think in LA County,
Under other.
34,000. Yes, 34,000.
And that was the
marks.
problem a lot of people were having.
That you
Not
go
know-
under
Hold on,
other.
let her finish her thought. Let her finish 1 second. Let her finish what she's, her
So I
comment.
think that for us, there's two ways of working for indigenous folks. One is, yes, to get involved in the official census and start to like figure out, one, how do we communicate this to the community? If we have to go under other, how do you kind of collectively agree on how you're going to categorize in order to have bigger numbers? Because we know 34,000 is a severe undercount. Second, we do have to like really talk about colonization, right? Post-colonization, or that we're still in, colonization, because a lot of folks don't want to identify as indigenous
as Zapotec, as Mixtec. Why? Because of the racism that a lot of people already spoke about on the panel. It's not cool to speak a different language that's not the predominant language that's spoken, right? They made people feel very ashamed of that. So because of the different organizations that have done cultural work, like in Los Angeles, I feel like it's a direct correlation to the census having the biggest population of indigenous people here in Los Angeles County, right? But how do we do a bigger push to kind of communicate that to the community that it's important to identify as your indigenous background, right? Either Zapotec, Mixtec, Chinantec, Nije, different communities that live in Los Angeles. So then we also did a push, starting now, even though we know the census is down the line, to have billboards or to have spots and to say, I am Mixtec, I am Zapotec, I am Nije. Because it's important to positively reinforce your identity because it does build political power in the allocation of resources.
Yes.
So I do think that has to be worked both ways with the community and also, with the Census Bureau and have those conversations.
Esai, I'm switching chairs with your lady. I'm just saying. I love that. Hey, we are at time, so I love all the comments. I'm going to give the opportunity. Oh, I didn't see you. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you've been there patiently. I'm sorry. Not be long. And then I'll just hold on. So this is how it's going to go. So last comment, and then I'm going to give closing comments for our panelists. We'll close out. We'll talk about next events, and then if there's time while the team here is breaking down, if you guys want to talk, you want my card, you want to talk to any of the panelists, we'll be here. Go for it.
Word. Thanks for having me. I just kind of wanted to ask a question about, I guess kind of a little self-serving too. I'm a recent graduate. I was lucky enough to be in Merida for my graduation.
Recent graduate from where?
Evergreen State University.
Let's go. Okay.
Let's go. But basically, I was down there like working with Muggos mostly and everything like that. And it was really fascinating to see kind of what we were discussing here. Like the politics there was going to be very different than in Merida itself and everything like that. And through our discussion today, just kind of seeing that it's near impossible, right, to lump everybody together like that. It's just not going to happen. But something that I do see like happening here, even like amongst ourselves, and with our peers is like telling stories. Like when people have the power to kind of set their own narrative control, there is like a gelling or at least an element of edification. And so I guess my question for y'all, because that seems like that's the best we can do, which is pretty damn good, I think, actually, if we do it, is just how do you see that happening like in our community here in Los Angeles? Where do you see that happening? What does that look like to y'all?
What does what part look like?
I guess being
Storytelling, even?
Yeah, being able to like basically give voice to like who it is that we are, like all those different.
Sure.
Bueno, aquí estamos.
Con el Afro-Latino Education and Art Collective, con la Plaza de Cultura y Artes, but yes, I understand what you're saying. Somebody want to take that?
Yeah. No, I misunderstood that. So what was the question again? How do we
create platforms to elevate storytelling and voices for all these different, identities we have?
Yeah, no. I think it's very important. It's always best to start at home, right? Like our parents and grandparents have always said, or in my case, is that you learn everything at home. So sharing stories, sharing what your thoughts, and then going and then start branching out to your community. And then for the community to other communities, I think that's the best way. How do we actually make sure we get involved is basically by being united. Unfortunately, sometimes we think that we don't have the time, we don't want to spend the time, but it's always important to work together. I think that's what's missing in our community, to share, to work together, to do things, positive things together. And sometimes, I always tease around, I'm like, we're always really good for the gossips, right? But we're never good to do good for our community, and I think that's what we need to change.
I love that. Thank you. So thanks for the wonderful, thought-provoking questions and comments from the audience. Please give yourself a round of applause. And then I'm going to ask it for closing comments from each of our panelists so we can go ahead and let our La Plaza staff get home. Yeah, so closing comments, start with Kevin and then go down the line.
I just want to thank you all for showing up. It's obviously you all are here, so it's almost as if we're preaching to the choir. You're not the group of people that need to be listening to these conversations. But yeah, I think it's simple, you know, just continuing to listen to other people. I think, yeah, we can get bogged down on like quantifying the US Census, right? That's the end goal, where we're all represented on that form, because that is material resources, right? And that's the way we can diversify the resources that other communities have an abundance of and our other communities definitely need. But I think that starts with conversations like this, right? This is the first time I've personally have been able to join a conversation with other Afro-Latinos or Indigenous peoples from Latin America. I've been preaching to my partner for the last 7 years. I'm like, this research, I don't know if it's going anywhere, but I think that's showing a shift in how we're understanding the diversity within this broader Latino category. To be just even able to be in conversation with all of you is an honor, and to be able to speak to all of you. So I appreciate you all for sharing.
Absolutely, and I heard you and I see you.
Yes.
Just know that. That's why we're here. I'll have closing comments.
All right, closing comments. Don't loop everybody together. That's not for them to do. That's for you to do. You know, so you be the change. You want to see more storytelling? You want to see more spaces like that? My friend, you don't have to create that.
That too.
I invite you to do that. Is there something very powerful to, you know, to invite friends, to get your neighbor that maybe you know, maybe you don't know, and start talking about these experiences, your own experience, because nobody can fight you over your own experience. Like, nobody, you know? That's important. I wouldn't do a good justice to my work if I wouldn't ask you to also think about our beautiful planet and all of the things that are happening. Don't take it for granted, because this is our issue too. This is not the issue of the middle class or the tree huggers. This affects all of us, you know, air, water, all these issues, you know, affect all of us. And, you know, lastly, I wanna really thank Shannon for providing this space, you know, for us to have these conversations, for us to have some visibility, you know, and not feel like we're just alone out there, a lone wolf, you know, pack out there, but now we are in a way connected, and, you know, we are a bigger family.
Thank you, Aura.
First of all, I really want to thank you for this space, but also want to say the mutual respect. I think, like I said, us as Indigenous communities, we really believe in respect. And that's the reason why you will see a lot of community members out there, you know, members that maybe look like me. And it's very important because it's something that it was given to us as, you know, many generations. We respect the land, we respect ourselves, we respect our peers, and I wanted to start with that. And then second, I think, as the colleagues have mentioned, is that thank you for being here, because this is something that you can definitely, you know, share out there. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not taken as important or seen as an important topic to talk about. And it's okay, because everyone has different ideas, different beliefs. I just think that it's our job to do something for the community in general, but I also really want to thank everyone for being here. And I just want to also say, if you ever do want to visit Oaxaca, which is a state in Oaxaca, Mexico, please, you know, you're more than welcome to reach myself or Jan, because we travel a lot to Oaxaca. We go there at least every 2 months. And
Group trip.
And I really want to invite you, because I want you to really experience the community, not the touristy areas, but the community.
Spring break.
Awesome. Hey, thanks everyone.
Bags are packed.
Thanks everyone. And I love, what's your name? Lowell?
Yeah.
Lowell, excellent question, because I'll also share is that Afro-Latino Education and Arts Collective, obviously we're, you know, centered on elevating Black Latino, Afro-Latino voices, right? But it's also important that allyship, right? although my organization's mission is to, center Afro-Latino voices, but I'm like, how do I make sure we show up? So I've been expanding that, meaning I curated a Hispanic Heritage Month experience or event for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power for their employees. We invited the public and folks to come out. And I will honestly say, it was diverse. I had everybody there. Everybody there. But I also made sure Black Latinos were there. Because it's not true if it's a non-Black person typically that's organizing a Hispanic Heritage event, there's no intentionality with making sure that there is diversity and there's inclusion. And so that's what I pride myself on, to your point, is that, how not only am I centering my community, but how do I help include less heard voices? So that's why I'm super excited about this partnership here, because I'm like an Asian Latino, like, that food combo is off the chain, right? So that's, for me, that's my closing comments. Thank you, everybody. Some events coming up. Thank you to La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, Jonathan, everybody here. La Plaza de Cultura y Artes has been one of the biggest allies and one of the biggest supporters of the Afro-Latino community, so I thank you for that, because that's very hard to find in Los Angeles. Promoting the Afro-Latino Culture Fest. Put it on your calendar for July 19th. From 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., you can find our page on Instagram, the Afro-Latino Culture Fest. You'll see a little orange icon there. One of the panel discussions, if I can pull it off, is we plan to have C-suite level Afro-Latinas, CEOs of major corporations, to come on the panel and talk about, their lived experience. But it's going to be food, a tropical bar, so I invite all of you out. I hope to see all your wonderful faces. And continue to check the calendar out for La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, because they have a lot of wonderful events and other platicas going on. And with that said, we'll close out this wonderful panel. Again, follow us on Instagram at Afro-Latino Culture Fest. We still have some lunch left, food, snacks, so feel free to go there and get your fill of coffee. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon.